2012 is a year that I've been thinking about a lot this year because it's the 100th anniversary of a bunch of things that have affected us today. It was the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, which changed a lot of social mores, a lot of things about technology. It's the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Republic of China. Just a lot of things about it. So I thought I would start by talking about 1912 a second and think about where we are now versus where we were then. And it's funny, things have are kind of coming back to where they were. In 1912, streets were actually named after the places that were on them. Like you would have Church Street, where the churches would be, and Mill Street, where the mills were, and Bank Street, and Market Street, and Court Street, and Park Street, versus Fox Chase Glen, and things that don't really mean anything that we have today. I actually saw a street not too long ago called Parallel Street. That was the name of the street. But, you know, in 1912, we had things like food vendors on the streets. And now we have food vendors on the streets again. We had coffee shops where people hung out. And now we have coffee shops where people hang out. We had farmers markets. And now we have farmers markets. And we had trolleys. And now we have trolleys. A lot of things have come back. In the middle, somewhere in 1962, something bad happened to a lot of communities across the country. And at the time, we didn't know quite what was happening, but you know, now we know what it was. And it was a whole series of things that happened really after World War II, when servicemen and women were coming back and planning for a new kind of life that was fueled largely, no pun intended, by cars, by an auto-oriented community that led to things like development of suburbs all over the country with sort of separated out housing from separated out industrial areas and separated out shopping areas. The number of cars that we had in the US grew so exponentially between 1930 and 1960. And that industry was fueled in large part, and there you can see how you can like go to the store and buy lots of stuff with your new car. It was fueled largely by the passage of the Interstate Highway Act of 1956, which created this network of highways across the country for the small price tag of only $51 billion, 1956 dollars, to make it easier for people to travel farther away from town centers. And that set off a whole series of transformations in land use in the country. So everybody moved to the burbs to have their happy little lives. You know, the men worked in town in the daytime, and the women stayed home and planned these marvelous little dinners and dinner parties, and slowly went insane, giving birth to the psychiatric industry. And you know, we kind of adopted a new architectural vernacular for the era, and retail began transforming as cities transformed. Retail followed people out to the suburbs. It's always a market follower. It's never a market leader. It goes where people are. And groceries were one of the first industries that made that transformation from the kind of stores you would go into downtown where a clerk would actually help you get the food you wanted from behind the counter, to this sort of radical idea of a grocery store where you could actually go in, push a cart up and down the aisles and get your own food, to finally ones that were completely auto-oriented and located out in the new burbs. We had whole new business concepts that were born because of the greater mobility that we had with cars, like drive-through theaters and drive-through restaurants. 1962, right between 1912 and where we are today, was kind of a landmark year for, no pun intended there either, for another reason. It's the year that Kmart, Target, and Walmart were all created. 50 years. They're historic now. Woohoo. There's the very first Walmart. I remind people sometimes that Walmart actually began life as an independently owned, family-owned downtown store. Isn't that kind of shocking? So be careful what you wish for. I talked about this last year, but this is really sort of what happened to begin to make cities unravel, is that we were creating more commercial space than we had market demand to support. In 1960, we had 4 square feet of retail space per person in the US. We now have 41 square feet per person, and only enough market demand to support about 17.2 of that. And that's what the problem is. We just have too much space. We have an abundance of space, and where that space has tended to be in the past in downtowns. That's actually beginning to turn around, and that's one of the good news things that I'm going to talk about today. By comparison, with our 41.5 square feet, the UK has 12. China has a half a square foot. The worldwide average is 4, just about 4.1 now. So we're way, way overbuilt. We have a lot more commercial space than we need. And those vacancies tended to occur in older downtowns because the shopping malls were getting all the new business and the downtowns were the ones that weren't organized. And a lot of communities went through this kind of funny cycle where as department stores left, they left behind these sort of big vacant spaces, and rent was dropping because market demand was low for the space, because there was a surplus, there was a glut of commercial space in the community. And as the rents downtown dropped, who needs cheap, large spaces? Furniture stores, antique stores, appliance stores. And so a lot of communities had lots of these businesses kind of come in and take over the spaces, and that began to sort of turn the direction of downtowns in a different way from the sort of, wide mix of uses that it had for a long, long time. And this is a real problem that we're going to be dealing with for years and years and years, this glut of commercial space and the changes that it brought about. City Investments has been studying this for the past couple of years. I love this one. We estimate that 25% of regional malls have occupancy rates below 75%. Definitely a concerning figure. Demalling will continue as owners determine that in certain trade areas, traditional enclosed venues have outlived their usefulness. The International Council of Shopping Centers estimates that 25 to 30% of shopping centers are going to need to be adapted for non-retail purposes. This is the shopping mall that actually killed my hometown downtown, which was itself demolished a few years ago. It is one of almost 1,000 shopping malls and shopping centers that have been demolished in the past 5 years in the US. Yeah. But, a tremendous waste of resources, a tremendous waste of materials, and land, and all of the economic crises that it brought about. And we're going to be dealing with this one for a long, long time. I've heard of several communities, actually the entire state of Vermont considered this a few years ago. A few communities are considering enacting a law, passing a law that will require anyone who wants to develop a commercial building over 50,000 square feet in size to post a bond before they can get a building permit, with the proceeds of the bond to be used to demolish the building and return the land to a virgin condition if the building is vacant for more than a year. Isn't that cool? I love America. Communities can do so many wacky things. You can pass laws to do whatever you want. Kind of crazy. This past year has seen the death of some major retail chains in the US, and many, many retail outlets, individual stores, as national retailers have been downsizing and adapting to not just the economic downturn, but also to some pretty profound transformations in how retailing occurs. It is kind of, not for nothing that there is now a TV show on called Suburgatory. And there's still lots of wacky stuff happening out there as communities try to right the boat and make downtowns great places again. I love this "stop here on red but no stopping" sign, and I love this push button to cross Atlantic. Only in a downtown would you find something like that. But this has been a really, really great year. Some of the things that I talked about last year in talking about the best ideas of the year have really taken root this year. I'm seeing them happen all over the country and increasingly around the world as communities figure out some things in new ways and put some new programs and policies in place. The impact of millennials is going to be really substantial. Millennials being people who are basically between 16 and 34 years old now, who were born between the early 1980s and the early 2000s. They are, who in here is a millennial? Okay. Who feels like you're a millennial but you're really not? Yeah, okay, all right, there's the real crowd. And their shopping, their retail habits, and their life choices are shaped by a couple of things when it comes to economic choices. One is that they've seen their parents go through a couple of down cycles. They've seen them go through the dot-com boom and bust. They've seen them now go through the housing problem that we've had in recent years. And they're more likely to hold on to their money and to spend it locally, to invest it in things that they can actually see and experience and get to know themselves, rather than investing in some equity someplace else. They're not buying Facebook stock. And the other is their concern for the environment and a desire to not have such volume of materials used for consumer goods, if it need not be. And so they're spending their money differently when it comes to retail products and services. They want to know where the things that they buy come from, and so you're going to find a lot more products that are tagged with a QR code or a geotag that lets people know where their products come from. If you look at a bag of Lay's potato chips, look at the back of it, you'll find a little code number, a 4-digit code number. Go to Lay's website, punch in the number, and you can see on a map where the potatoes used for the potato chips in that bag were made. Not that anybody would buy Lay's potato chips, but you know. They repair things rather than throw them away. And I've begun to see things popping up around the country like sort of repair shops where you can bring in whatever you've got and there's somebody there, a couple people there, who can kind of fix almost anything. They support locally owned businesses, and they're supporting them with cash mobs, they're supporting them with carrot mobs. They're really putting a lot of energy behind them. They buy and repurpose used things, which gives them the opportunity to not only sort of do the right thing and keep something in the supply stream for a longer period of time, but it also gives them the ability to adapt something to their own personal taste and interest and really customize it so that it reflects who they are. Lots of the used merchandise stores that are popping up around the country are curated. They have stuff in them that has a story behind it, and those items are tagged so that you can see who owned it before, what the story is, how it's evolved over a period of time. This is a store in Stockholm that called Judith's Secondhand, which is a very high-end designer next door, Judith, and she's now opened a secondhand store so that people who buy stuff from her new can sell it several years later in the used store next door, which is, of course, outstripping the original store in sales. There's a sort of sine curve that's not going to work out over time there for her, but she'll figure that out. They're inclined to share things rather than buy them. Zipcar, of course, was sort of a pioneer in this, but that peer-to-peer networking is popping up all over the place now with people sharing things rather than buying them, sharing extension ladders and wheelbarrows in neighborhoods, sharing their sofas to people who are coming in from out of town who want to rent a bed for the night, and selling things to each other. Anybody ever seen the website Fiverr or bought anything from Fiverr? Fiverr. It's stuff that people are selling for $5. There's something like 800,000 things offered on Fiverr for $5, and you would not believe it. I mean, some of it is just like you can get somebody to call up, you know, your girlfriend and sing her happy birthday to you, to her, and on her answering machine, or somebody will record themselves looking like a giant duck, telling their boss off in a video. But there's also really helpful stuff too, like, you know, I can fix a website glitch that you have, you know, in 10 minutes, or I live in this town and I can give you a list of restaurants that I think you might like. Lots of really helpful stuff. People are really exchanging ideas, sharing products, sharing knowledge with each other, and millennials are eating this up. They're buying things that last longer. This is an example that I actually showed last year. This company is growing. It's called Hand Me Down. They make men's clothing, and they make it to last for generations. So every piece of clothing has a tag in it with a line, with 4 or 5 lines. The first person who buys it writes his name in the tag and the date he acquired it. The second person who then owns it writes his name in it and the date he acquired it, and so on, so that you have this kind of curated garment that's supposed to last for decades. There's the tag inside. They prefer smaller homes, and that's beginning to affect the supplies, you know, furniture, home furnishings, the things that you might use to furnish a home are now becoming smaller and multi-purpose as well. There are something like 80 million millennials right now. There are 61 million people under 12 years old who are right behind them, who are also going to be a pretty significant piece of this market. So we're going to have probably the next 2 or 3 decades of people entering their household formation years when they become major consumers, who are going to be influenced by these. So probably we're going to have less demand for retail stuff. So all the trends that we've seen in recent years are probably going to continue and accelerate. A lot of that demand appears to be now getting focused back into mixed-use town centers, into downtowns, where people can also live and work and walk and shop and dine and get together with their friends. Everything that we had kind of back in 1912 is coming back again, but with some interesting twists and frills. There are 3 major kind of things I wanted to talk about today, 3 kind of sort of categories of stuff where I'm seeing a lot of innovation occur. The first is raising local capital for local business development. And, you know, this has kind of been percolating for a while. This past year, it took off. It just absolutely has been soaring. Kickstarter and Indiegogo websites that help do crowdfunding for things, CrowdHive, have been a big part of that. This is the Old Town Theater in Alexandria, Virginia, which is being rehabbed now, with funding coming in part from people in the community who are contributing money through Kickstarter, actually buying sort of pledges, offering pledges for things. And there you can see, you can go to their website. I'm going to come back and talk about that later, that theater in a second. This is a bakery in Oakland, California, Sweet Bar Bakery, that raised all the money that it needed, its entire startup capital, through Kickstarter. I think I have a picture of their website. Yeah, there it is. And you can see his goal was $20,000, and he raised $21,337 to get this thing started. At this point, he was selling things that were, you know, basically cost him nothing. Things like naming rights to the muffins on his new menu. This is a crowdfunding web platform that the Association for Town Center Managers, sort of the equivalent of the Main Street program in the UK, has put together so that downtown organizations, high street redevelopment organizations in the UK can easily plug into here and help businesses raise money to expand or to get started and get launched. This is an example that I used last year, and it's taken an interesting twist now in the U.S. this past year. This is, for those of you who weren't here last year, this is it was a small family-owned candy store in the UK in a downtown. The people who owned it, the family that owned it, wanted to expand and begin making wholesale chocolates that they could sell through other retail outlets, and they wanted to raise £1 million. Like the monetary unit, not, you know, pounds of chocolate, to fund this. And they went to traditional lenders, and they kept getting turned down. So they decided to issue bonds, chocolate bonds, and you could get them in 1,000 and 2,000 pound denominations. But the thing was that, and it was just like a regular financial instrument. You could hold it for 3 years. I think you had to hold it for at least 3 years, and then you could redeem it for the original investment that you had. Instead of paying interest to their investors in cash, they paid interest to them in chocolates. So every 3 months you would get a box of chocolates as a result of this. There are a couple of communities in the US that are now looking at this model and considering using this to fund arts-related facilities in arts districts, where there'd be art bonds with the interest paid by artwork made by the artists who benefit from that, whether it's music or paintings or sculpture or craft items. So a kind of cool evolution as that begins to take root. Cabbage is a small equity investment fund that started up this past year, which is focusing exclusively on small businesses and helping them get the capital that they need. And of course, the big transformative thing that happened this year was the passage of the Jobs Act, which is it has lots of components, but the one that's really, really important here is that it makes it possible for communities, for businesses to put together stock offerings if the total amount of money that they're raising is under $1 million. There were a lot of reasons why, until this happened, that was very, very logistically possible. But now we can, in essence, crowdfund up to $1 million in stock issues for small business startups. And already there are a couple of communities in the country that are considering launching local stock exchanges, something we haven't had for almost 100 years as a result of the passage of the Jobs Act. I think next year we're going to see a lot of activity around this as businesses start putting together, small businesses start putting together local stock companies to fund their startup and expansion. If you want to know more about that, this is the guy that you want to hunt down at some point. His name is Michael Schumann, and he's been tracking this for eons. He wrote a couple of books. One of them is called I'm Going Local, and that's the one that talks most about this. And he's an absolute pro at helping communities put together those small stock programs. Second thing I wanted to talk about is interactivity and how incredibly important it is, especially to millennials who are living their lives in this very interconnected way with social media and cell phones and texting, and everything is a big connection. They really, really like to relate to their physical environment in a way that their parents and grandparents may not have done. And this kind of playfulness that you see here is popping up all over the country in all kinds of ways. And here are some examples. This is, I came across this this taxidermy shop in a downtown maybe 10 years ago, and he was pretty buttoned down, and all of a sudden I came back, and it's like everything has burst out into the sidewalk. You know, how do you make a taxidermy store kind of fun? He could actually kind of pull it off. This is a harp maker in downtown Rising Sun, Indiana. There's not a lot of market demand for harps, concert harps in Rising Sun. Pretty much everybody who needs one has bought one by now. But, you know, his market is global. He does all of his sales online, except for he has some T-shirt sales. He sells these T-shirts that say, "Love a harpist, there are only 85 strings attached." But other than that, you know, it's just a fabulous business to have downtown, because you walk downtown and you hear this harp music wafting out over the sidewalk. It just fills the air and is fabulous, and people are drawn to it. And you can wander inside his store, and he'll show you how he makes harps, give you a whole sort of lesson in harp making and how to play harps. Really, really a wonderful experience that really, really enriches the environment and makes it feel like a much more interactive place, orally as well as in every other way. This is a bodega. This is in a neighborhood in Boston, and it's a bodega that's been there for a long, long time, a little grocery store. No sign out front. Inside, you can see that it's a bodega. But here's the secret thing about this bodega is that it's in a long, narrow building, and the back part of it, the bodega itself is probably only using the first third or quarter of the building, and the back of it was kind of going to waste. Excess capacity, and it had a door, but on the back from an alley, but it didn't have any kind of display window. This guy went to the bodega and said that he'd like to rent the back of their building to open a men's clothing store. And what you do is, so you go into the store, and you can barely see, but on the floor there's a little plate. You can see right there in front of the Snapple machine. You step on that plate, it's a button in the floor. The door of the Snapple machine swings slowly open. It is not a Snapple machine. It is a men's clothing store behind it called Bodega. And it is packed with people shopping all the time. It is, I don't know what I can't remember what it's doing in sales per square foot, but it's something like 4 or 5 times the national average for a men's clothing store. People love it because they love finding the secret of Bodega and letting themselves in. This is coming to a subway station near you soon. This is something that Tesco has been experimenting with in Korea. These are basically backlit photos of their grocery shelves that they put on subway doors and the subway platform. So as you're waiting for your train in the morning, you basically go grocery shopping, pick out the groceries you want, scan the QR code, send it in. You tell them what time you're going to be back at the metro in the evening, and they have your groceries waiting for you there. How cool is that? Peapod is experimenting with that now in the US, doing exactly the same thing. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Talk about a way to really make it as easy as possible for customers to find you. And it's also really a lot of fun. Their demographics of millennial sales are sky high. Interesting window displays. This is a video inside a window that responds to what the person on the street is doing. So you walk by. People spend hours and hours and hours. They forget why they came downtown. They forget to go to work. They forget to pick up the dry cleaning because they stand here and play with this wacko window display, which works basically like this. They have these people, they're all artists, who have filmed themselves doing these gymnastics in different video loops, and it responds to a motion sensor that's embedded inside the storefront window. Best way to sell clothing I can possibly think of. That technology is working its way into all kinds of retail industries. This is a fashion brand, a fashion store that now has coat hangers that show you, as you touch the hanger to take something off and take a look at it, it tells you with a number how many likes it has gotten on Facebook. There you go, 1,059 likes on Facebook for that. These are GPS-enabled shoes. They're called No Place Like Home shoes. You literally click your heels together, and they will point you the way home. There's the antenna is the tongue. It plugs into your computer with a cable so that you can program in your address, and it tells you by the number of dots on your shoes which way you should go. This is an artist who I also talked about last year. Her name is, well, this is something she did. This is not the artist. Her name is Candy Chang, and she's doing a lot of interesting things with making downtowns and other places very interactive. This is a project that she did in Fairbanks, Alaska. It was an old hotel building called the Polaris Building, and it had been vacant for a while, and the developer and the city were trying to find a new use for it, and they hired her to help them in that process. If you have a tough community development solution, always hire an artist. You're going to get the best, most wonderful, rich ideas. And she basically branded this "Looking for Love Again," and put this big sign on the building, looking for a new use for the building. And along the base of it, on the ground floor, she had these two big blackboards, chalkboards. And on one side, it kind of turned the corner. On one corner, it asked people to write down their memories of the Polaris building. And on the other, it asked them to put their hopes for the Polaris building. And she just left a big bucket of chalk out there. And people would fill these chalkboards up every day, and she would photograph them at the end of each day. And by the end of 2 weeks, they had kind of come to community consensus about what some good supportable uses might be for the building, with people reacting to other people's comments as the comments went up. This is another project of hers that she did where she was looking for people to suggest new uses for a vacant building in the district. I want this on Broad Street, and she had these name badge stickers out there that you would slap on the building with a Sharpie, and you could write on it what you want it to be. So this is, I wish this was a bakery. I wish that she had said, I wish this were a bakery, but anyway, I wish this was a grocery, locally owned. I wish this was a bike shop. I wish this was real soul food. Really, really cool things. And this is a new project of hers. This is a candle shop, and the candle flame varies in light intensity. So if there are more people standing in front of it, it gets brighter. If there are fewer, it dims. The closer you get to it, the brighter it gets. How could you not want to go into that store? It's so cool. Yarn bombers are now kind of a well-established group in the U.S., yarn bombing places all over the place. And graffiti has this year really gotten a boost in popularity due to a developer in Miami who, oh, here's some more graffiti, kind of clever, decorating the cracks in the walls. But this is a developer who unfortunately just passed away a couple of weeks ago named Tony Goldman. And he bought this kind of decrepit warehouse district, a district in Miami that had one floor, concrete block buildings that were used for storage, and some of them had been used for, well, I guess they were all used for storage. Bought it and hired the best graffiti artists in Miami to paint the walls, and made it basically an art gallery of graffiti for the community called Wynwood Walls. And inside are really, really great restaurants and music clubs. All kind of fueled by the power of graffiti. The third thing I wanted to talk about is entrepreneurial energy. There is just this new sense of energy and vibrance in the places that I've traveled to in the past year, with lots of people starting new jobs. And I'm not quite sure what the genesis of it is. I think that there are a lot of people who have been sort of rethinking their careers or have lost their jobs because of the economic downturn, who have started businesses because that was the path available to them. Millennials tend to think, there was a survey I just saw 2 weeks ago where 36% of millennials believe that they will own their own business within the next 10 years. That is the highest rate since, guess when? 1912. Yeah. So lots of energy out there in business development, and it's popping up in lots of ways, and communities are helping nurture that along more and more. It's becoming kind of the established norm to help get those small businesses going. Even the big sort of community development corporations that in the past have focused mostly on recruiting 200, 300, 500 person industries are now realizing, you know what? We spent 10 years doing that. We haven't caught one yet. In the meantime, we have 500 new people working in these small businesses, and so even they're beginning to change their tune. Pop-up businesses are a great way to incubate new business ideas. This is a project that started in Oakland, California just about a year ago called Pop-Up Hood, where they kind of targeted a neighborhood at a time, and in there, working with property owners, are making storefront space available to businesses who have to submit a business plan and kind of, pass some tests to get their business established. And in exchange for that, they get their space free for a few months. This is a jeweler who is operating their own pop-up hood now, who really, she'd been working out of her house for years and was really kind of surprised when they approached her and they thought that her jewelry was like nice and worth selling in a store. She was astonished. This is there's a popular Japanese restaurant in Oakland called Imami, and everybody loves Imami's table settings, their glassware and their table settings, their plates. So they asked them to consider opening a pop-up store that would just sell the stuff that they use in their own restaurant. And they called it Imami Mart, and it's operating out of one of these storefronts. This is a pop-up cookie shop owned by a mother and son. Take a look at the sign for a second. It's printed on a piece of clear vinyl so it can adhere to a storefront window and be reused. There they are, there's the mother and son, and they'd considered renting their own space, but then they realized, you know what, we really only are gonna bake about 6 dozen cookies a day, and that's not a lot to rent a space for. So what they're doing is they're going to basically every business in the district and asking if they can rent 4 square feet of space for a day. And so they float around and they just take their peel-off sign with them and peel it on the front of the window. People like run through the downtown in the morning. Where's Cookie Bar today? Have you seen it? I gotta find it. Pop-ups can be used too to just like sell one thing that you're kind of trying to focus on and get rid of. This is a guy in New York who published a book called Ed's Martian Book. Anybody read Ed's Martian Book? Well, so he self-published it and he bought a few too many copies. And so he had to find a way to get rid of them. So he basically rented a pop-up space for 3 months to get rid of his books. And the bookstore is organized, his shop is organized by, cooking, self-help, current events, history. It's all the same book. It's all Ed's Martian Book. But he blew through his copies and had a chalkboard outside saying the number of books he needs to sell in order to make his rent. So not probably an ongoing use, but a pretty cool idea for somebody who's trying to sell something. This is a business that was designed to be a permanent pop-up or a permanent incubator, depending on how you think about it. They're kind of converging as concepts. It's called Grand Opening, and every 3 months it completely changes what it does. So in this iteration, it's a coffee shop. In this one, it's an auction house. In this one, it was a ping pong parlor. And the business ideas that kind of take root and gather a following get spun off into their own freestanding space. And those that don't just kind of get plowed under and they use the space for something else. Florence, South Carolina had a pop-up competition 2 years ago for the first time. Their downtown organization is called Meanwhile Downtown, which I really like. I think that's a sweet name. And they did something similar to Indiehood in California, where they went to property owners and asked them, property owners with vacant space, and basically said, look, you're not getting anything for your space now. It's been vacant for a while. We will do all the sort of red tape cutting of getting insurance and getting the utilities taken care of. Will you give us your space for 6 months for a startup business, for a pop-up that we will vet? We're going to have a competition and look at their business plans and test their ideas, and then let them have the space for 6 months for free. They placed 2 businesses in there in 2011. They placed 2 more this year in 2012. Of those 4 businesses, 3 have now signed permanent leases and are established businesses. This is an RFP that Detroit just put out a month or 2 ago for exactly the same thing, basically asking people to come forward with entrepreneurial ideas, propose concepts for pop-ups. They'll help them get established, and hopefully they'll take root and become full-time businesses. The shopping malls have also caught on to this. We know about their high vacancy rates from the wonderful stats of the people at City Research. And so a couple of shopping mall management firms are now doing exactly the same thing, trying to tap into the entrepreneur market in communities and offer free rent to businesses that want to get started there. But we don't want them to go there. And lots of training programs targeting millennials and targeting younger people to help them learn entrepreneurial skills. This is one of those things that in that sort of bad middle part of the last century kind of disappeared. We used to teach people entrepreneurial skills in high school. We used to have distributive education classes and teach them how to run businesses and how to get financing to do that. And that was part of the infrastructure that kind of has washed away over time. in essence, community organizations, nonprofits, for the most part, are beginning to put those programs back in place and teach kids how to run businesses so that they can look at that as a career instead of selling tires at Walmart or flipping burgers at McDonald's. This is another kind of variation on incubating small businesses. This is something that's based on an idea that they did in Singapore. This is in New York, and it's called Shopping Box. And you can see in the window here, this kind of grid of boxes. Each of these boxes is, let's see if I have a picture of them, is rented out to a different person, usually a craftsperson, somebody who might sell something on Etsy, can rent one of these boxes for $50 a month. And the store as a whole is then staffed by, a single person who can be there to sell things to people and, do the bookkeeping to get the money back to the person who's renting it and have them come in and replenish it. This is the model that was done in Singapore to get it started, called IncuBox. Great use of a storefront window that might be vacant. Great use of a great way for an existing business to earn more revenue by renting out a small amount of space along a vacant wall, and a great way to generate revenue for people who right now are working out of their homes or out of co-working spaces and looking for some kind of sales venue. Something else that is getting a lot of entrepreneurial energy around it has to do with the conversion of movie theaters to digital content distribution, which is just like we all had to go through the digital conversion thing with our home TVs. That's happening to movie theaters by the end of 2013. So every theater that's showing film in the country is going to have, if it doesn't already have, digital equipment so that it can get content in different ways. What this means, though, it means a couple things. One is we've got 1,500 small-town movie theaters in the country that are in trouble because it cost about between $70,000 and $100,000 to get this equipment. Look on Kickstarter and look for digital equipment theater, and you're going to find a lot of small-town theaters that are raising money for that right there to pay for the conversion. But what it means is that instead of just showing film that comes shipped in a canister on reels of cellulose that you feed through a projector, it means that this place can become almost a 24/7 training center, gathering center. It can be a place where you show movies during prime times. It can be a place where you go watch a NASCAR race after work. It can be a place where there's distance learning in the morning. It can be a place where you show cartoons to kids on a big screen or do Guitar Hero nights late at night on Friday or Saturday. It can be the kind of place where you go and watch the Metropolitan Opera live, which is happening through larger markets in the US now, but because of this is going to become very, very common and accessible to theaters all over the country. I think we're going to see a lot of entrepreneurial energy in the year ahead as theaters begin programming, kind of realizing, our market isn't now just going to be made on Friday and Saturday nights, but we actually have a bigger market that we can pursue. This is a cool thing that I saw happen this past year, speaking of entrepreneurial activity. Anybody know what this is? I will give all the money in my pocket to anybody who knows what it is. What? Ale. Not ale. Any guesses? Not ice. Not salt rot sugar. It's called nanocrystalline cellulose. I know that somebody was back there wanting to raise their hand, but you were shy. And what this is like this really, really cool stuff. It's made from wood fiber, and it's made from microscopic wood fiber. It's like nano-sized in diameter, and it's about 10 times its diameter in length, which is still nano-sized, so very, very tiny, but it has the tensile strength 8 times that of steel. It's incredibly strong, and it's kind of a viscous texture when it's heated so that you can kind of melt it down and mold it into things. And you can extract it from sawdust, from twigs. You don't have to harvest entire trees in order to get it. You can get it from very small pieces of wood. This was kind of found, created, whatever you call something that's kind of been there all along, we just didn't know it, in Canada about 5 or 6 years ago, because there was a forest in the Northwest that had been infested with some kind of beetles, and the beetles had killed this forest, and they knew that the trees were going to rot, the wood would rot in 20 years, and they didn't want to lose all that wood, so they were trying to figure out something to do with it. So they figured out that they can extract this and get this substance. There are 2 plants in the world now that are making it. One's in Canada and one's in France. And guess how many applications they have found for this so far? One. And in part, that's because of government funding, but of course the government immediately thought of, the US government, of, we can use it to make body armor. So, you know, great use, there's defense money there to pay for it, I suppose, but that's it. So this group of people in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, where the lumber industry is in decline, and the most creative stuff they're thinking of so far right now is, hey, let's make wooden whirligigs and sell those. They can't think of what to do to kind of turn the industry around. They got together with a bunch of local artists to brainstorm uses of this new material, and all of a sudden it is like a, you know, Tinder going off, no pun intended there, of all these people starting businesses to make new substances with this nanocrystalline cellulose. Really, really cool energy coming from getting together a bunch of wood scientists with a bunch of artists and just brainstorming how can we use this in new, cool, creative ways. There are some threats on the horizon that I think we need to keep in mind and be wary of. The big boxes, the big retailers who have really changed things in a not necessarily good way for our economy have discovered downtowns and small locations. What a concept. This is a new sort of small-scale PetSmart that's called Unleashed. Here's Walmart's neighborhood market. Walmart has finally realized that there actually is an urban market they could pursue. This is the rendering of their new store in Washington, D.C., in downtown Washington. You can live above a Walmart. How's that for cool? But they discovered the market, and so we have to be wary that what happened in the suburbs, where they kind of just completely pulled out the market that supported lots of independent businesses, does not begin happening in urban areas. We need to be wary of what's happening with highway spending, so that highway dollars, transportation dollars, don't continue to just go into expansion of highway systems, but are being used for bike trails and multimodal transportation and bike lanes. There is, I think, an enormous demand welling up on the horizon. It's actually been here all along, but it's really strong now, for multi-generational housing, which so far is all being developed out in the suburbs. I'm not seeing much of it happening in closer in areas near downtowns, which are walkable to schools, walkable for people who don't have cars, who have mobility issues. So I think that there's a huge need for that to happen. We've been really kind of careless and negligent about housing for the past 50 years or so in the U.S. A friend of mine, Donovan Ripkema, who studies sort of the economics of historic buildings, came up with this kind of chilling statistic a few years ago. He found that on average for the past 30 years, we have demolished 667 historic and older houses every day in the U.S. 667 per day for 30 years. But we have a shortage of affordable housing, and we have a shortage of multi-generational housing and neighborhoods that support multiple generations. So a big need for us to keep on the radar screens and hopefully talk about in a few years. And here's the stat that really kind of punches that home. Of all the people in human history who ever reached the age of 65, half of them are alive now. Nobody in this room, of course. We need to make sure that we're, not continuing to develop places like this. I showed these slides last year. I'm going to do it again. Anybody recognize this? I've photoshopped out the name of the business and the logo. What is it? How about that one? How about that one? How about that one? Doesn't that just scare the crap out of you? It is we're just letting these corporations put their logos up and down the roads leading into our communities. We need to make sure that we're really doing great vernacular architecture. Again, the best idea of 2012 is Ed Walker. Anybody who just says, hey, I want to put together a conference to bring people together and talk about solutions for small cities, that's just amazing. This is going to be a fun event. You're going to meet lots of people, share lots of ideas, have lots of fun, hear lots of cool music, eat lots of great food, and most importantly, innovate. Bounce around ideas with people. Talk about ideas that you've heard. See what comes out of it. See if you can create a new idea out of what you've just gotten there. And we're going to win. Thanks.